if you can just give us an indication in the chat window that you can actually hear us, and we'll get underway. Fabulous, thank you, Nicholas. So let me begin by introducing myself. So my name is Steve McDonald. I am one of the directors at the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership and one of the original designers of our Humanitarian Leadership program, which is also known as our Graduate Certificate of Humanitarian Leadership. And one of the things that I spend a lot of time thinking about, is how we ensure that practitioner approaches are brought into our teaching and learning activities, and not just ours, but also those of our partners as well. And so one of the ways in which we do that is through simulation. The Centre for Humanitarian Leadership was established in 2015, though the course itself has been running since 2012. The centre has been set up as a collaborative initiative between both Deakin University, which is a Melbourne-based university or Australia-based university, and Save the Children, which is one of the world's largest child-focused humanitarian organisations around the world. Our mission as a centre is really to transform transform leadership in the humanitarian system. And one of the ways in which we do that is by bringing both academia and practitioners together into the same place. I've got about 15 years as a humanitarian practitioner. I have worked across Asia, Africa, a little bit of work in the Middle East, and a little bit of work in South America, as well as working out of places such as Australia and the UK as well. The centre has been set up off the back of our Humanitarian Leadership program, or Graduate Certificate, and what we're really trying to do is to deliver leadership education for humanitarians in a way that is it's intensive, it's challenging, but more importantly, we do it in a way which really emphasises the role of the individual as a leader, rather than and how they then influence both the team and organisation and the system more widely, rather than just presenting people with a range of leadership theories and ideas, but rather looking at how we actually put those into practice. I'm just going to ask my colleague if she can help me out here. I just want to here we go. So there you go, there's the centre. We've got about 20 staff in the centre, most of whom are based in Melbourne, but some of whom are based overseas. We also have a number of associates that work with us as well. We do a whole range of things from teaching and learning. So humanitarian leadership is obviously a big theme across both our teaching activities, but also in our research activities. And it's for me, it's a real privilege to be able to actually work with people who are leaders in their own right, but are doing so in order to in order to help communities in crisis. We take people from a whole range of different backgrounds. So we have people, for example, in our master's course, we have people who are new entrants to humanitarian work. But within our leadership course, it really is much more around people who have at least 5 years of experience working in aid and development, of which they should have spent at least 2 or 3 years managing teams and managing people as well. One of the reasons we designed the course the way that we did was really to bring together both the academic and the practitioner perspectives on how we do things. And I'd spent a long time looking around at other courses and other approaches to leadership more broadly, but also looking at what was going on in the disaster management space as well as the corporate leadership space. And one of the things that really struck me was that many of them either tried to apply leadership theories and say, well, here's a toolkit of leadership, go away and do that. Or what they were doing is they were putting people through what were quite, they were interesting, but they were quite sedate, practical exercises. And so one of the key decisions that we made very early on was that use of intensive simulations was going to ensure that people were able to not just understand themselves better, but they're also able to understand how they could change their leadership and test it in a simulated environment. It's very seldom in our lives do we actually get the chance to step back from what we're actually doing in order to try and do things differently in a safe way where we don't have to worry too much about the consequences if we get it wrong. Certainly as a humanitarian, and I'm sure many of you have had this experience, is that when you try and do things differently within a real world environment, the consequences of getting it wrong, either on your team or on the community that you're seeking to serve, can be quite dramatic. So hence why we use quite extensive and quite comprehensive simulations in order to not just teach leadership, but it's really about practicing leadership. I very much believe that the best way to improve somebody's leadership practice, and this is something I've experienced myself through my own leadership practice, is to be able to make mistakes in order to better understand yourself and your leadership approach, and then to be able to test that out in ideally an environment where there are a few consequences for making those mistakes. Because I've certainly, from my own experience, made mistakes in the real world that, and I regret those mistakes that I've made. And if I'd had the opportunity to practice in those environments in a different way, I may have made different decisions at different points. And this is really one of the fundamental reasons that drives our use of simulated crises to teach and practice and assess leadership capability for individuals. We do use some tools to help us do this. So we use a tool called the Hogan Leadership Inventory, which is a tool that really helps students and staff as well. I found it an immensely valuable tool to understand both what their leadership potential is, but also what their derailers are, what we call the dark side of their leadership, which is the behaviours that you might display when you are under pressure that might actually cause you to undermine both your leadership, but also the performance of a team as well. And what we do around this is we construct a very intensive simulated environment, in which we actually test and measure student performance against 6 leadership behaviours. And these 6 leadership behaviours are ones that we distilled from a whole range of other ones, which we think are core to being a humanitarian leader. Now, the real difference between a humanitarian leader and a leader in business or a leader in politics and so on is that the environment in which you're working is always in a crisis of some description. And so we chose these 6 behaviours after quite careful thought and consideration. And those 6 behaviours are, we help people actually grow those behaviours over the whole of sort of the 8 months of the course. And so what will quite often happen is that we'll see students come in at the beginning of the course, and they'll be operating at what we call the self-awareness level of those behaviours, and I'll talk about the behaviours themselves in a moment. But by the time they come out at the end of the course, we expect them to be kind of operating at the adding value or high level demonstration of those behaviours. And it's behaviours like delivery of results, because if you're working in a humanitarian crisis and you can't deliver results, then we've got an issue. And we expect that leaders have to be able to do that within a humanitarian context. And again, this is why we use simulation in order to allow people to practice that in a safe way. The other thing that's quite critical, and this isn't about having a booming voice or having a significant personal presence, but this idea of being able to communicate vision and strategic purpose. A team or an organisation that doesn't have a vision or a strategic purpose won't know where it's going. And when you're in a humanitarian crisis, it's absolutely critical that people understand where you're going and why you're going there. And this is one of the other, the second behaviour that we think is really quite critical for humanitarian leadership. The third one that we talk about, and this is one that's always a struggle, well, I like to think of a humanitarian response, particularly in the early days, is something where you are helping both a community but also a team and an organisation undergo quite significant change and transformation. So as a humanitarian leader, you need to be able to demonstrate how you can help people through change and transformation, particularly when they're under pressure, when they're dealing with a crisis. This is a particularly difficult challenge for them. The fourth behaviour I want to touch on is building high-performing teams, because a lot of people talk about the sort of the I of leadership, the me component, and how you are as a leader is important. But leadership isn't about you; it's actually about your team. And within a humanitarian context, being able to build a high-performing team is absolutely critical to the success of what you're trying to do. And I have seen over the years, and I'm sure you've seen over the years, teams that have performed really, really well have done so because their leaders have supported and enabled that team to succeed. Whereas teams that perform poorly generally perform poorly because their leaders don't give them the space that they need in order to perform well. I think that's four. Where are we? We've got another two behaviours that we use. One is around strategic thinking. Now, as a leader, we talk about this quite a lot during our courses, but the idea of being able to take what I refer to as the balcony view. And the balcony view is something where you actually step back from the day-to-day action and you actually look as you were from a balcony and see what's going on, and that helps to aid your strategic thinking. And good leaders, effective leaders, will take that time out in order to actually be able to determine what it is they need to be thinking about next. It's very easy within any crisis, and it doesn't matter whether you're involved in humanitarian work or disaster management or crisis management or any of these things, but it's very easy to find yourself getting bogged down with the detail and the kind of operational aspects of what it is you're trying to achieve, which will quite often mean that you forget to look up at the horizon from time to time. It means that you can quite often forget to think about how all the different components fit together. And this is where strategic thinking is so important to being a leader within a humanitarian context. And you've got to be able to get that balance right between, if you like, being on the ground or being on the dance floor in order to help people achieve what they need to do in that moment, but at the same time being able to make sure that you are also taking on the kind of the strategic thinking challenge that goes with that as well. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about delivery of results. We've talked about change and transformation. We've talked about communicating vision and strategic purpose. We have talked about building high-performing teams. We have talked about strategic thinking, and I'm missing one, which I should actually remember. Managerial courage. That's the one. Managerial courage is a really interesting one, because many of us work within organisations where displaying managerial courage on a regular basis can be sometimes career limiting, and it's about you as a leader being able to actually say no, but it's also about you as a leader being able to say yes for people as well. And this is really quite critical to the success of a humanitarian leader. And what we try to do through our simulation activities, which have been very, very thoughtfully and carefully designed, and there are literally hundreds of lines of programming that's gone into these. But one of the things we really try to do is to emphasise these 6 behaviours as we put people through the simulated activities. One of the things that's really quite key to how we run these simulations is that we try to match them as close to reality as we can. The simulations are constructed based on the experiences, not just of myself, but many humanitarian practitioners. You will sometimes meet characters who you think, that person's not really real, but actually they are representative of real people that we've either worked with or have met or encountered in some way during a humanitarian crisis. And the thing that is really quite extraordinary about the kinds of simulations and these sort of live learning environments that we set up is that our students, almost all of our students, walk away at the end of these activities with an understanding of not just who they are as a leader and what the world is like that they're working in, but oftentimes a reflection of the experiences that they have themselves already had and how they then reflect on those. They reflect on their own leadership within those experiences, and it gives them a real opportunity to think about how they make that connection between the simulated environment and the real environment. Now, I don't want to give too much away about these simulation activities because that would spoil the surprise. But these are things that are going to draw you in a way that I don't think any other learning program does. They are deliberately set up to put you under pressure, but you've been put under pressure in a way that is both safe, but also is a way in which you can learn using a method that is very different from any other course or activity that you'll have done before. In saying that, the simulations that we run for leaders are really set at a much higher level than those that you might run for, say, people involved in operational activities. And it's probably important to point that out because many people have gone through operational style simulations where the focus is very much on delivery of operational tasks and so on. What we've tried to do with our leadership simulations is to strip out a lot of the operational tasks so that people can really focus in on the strategic tasks that we want our leaders to be thinking about. As I already said, the one of the things that I really love about this course, and I have to admit I'm biased because I was one of the people that designed the original course, but one of the things that I really love about this course is that it provides you with 8 months of being able to look at you. And that's something that firstly, you don't get an opportunity to do much of in life anyway. But secondly, it is something that is deeply confronting to actually take the time out to reflect on your own leadership style, your capability, and how you might change that as well. And we don't expect people to do that alone either, because what we do is you get coached through the process, and we also work with you in order to identify a mentor who can also help you better reflect on your own leadership as well. And then that's coupled with a range of tools that we use. So, for example, as I've said, we use the Hogan Leadership Inventory, which is it's a confronting tool, but it's incredibly effective, and it's the kind of tool that if you embrace it, you will really walk away not just with a better understanding of who you are as a leader or what your motivations and values are, but you'll also walk away with a better understanding of how you might mitigate or address things that might be holding you back as a leader or undermining your leadership as well. It's important to remember here as well that being the leader is not about having a badge that says, I'm the boss, but it's about how you also can be a leader from within a team as well, and the kind of role that everyone should have, whether they're formally holding a position of leadership or not, as well. But one of the things, as I said, that's very unique about this program is that it is something that gives you a very thorough understanding of who you are as a leader. We also, one of the other tools that we also use is we use a tool called a 360-degree feedback tool. And again, that's where both your peers internally and externally, people that you might already lead and manage, as well as those who might lead or manage you, will give you feedback around the 6 behaviours that I described earlier. I'm sure you're all getting a bit weary with my voice, so I'm going to pass over to questions soon. But as I've already mentioned, during the course you do get a significant amount of coaching and access to coaches. But one of the things that, and certainly our alumni have flagged this as something that they've really valued, is the diversity of our students who are on this course from a range of different organisations. I think we've had something like, I think we must have had over 40 or 50 different organisations involved. But I certainly had more than 90 nationalities involved, and they're not just from international non-government organisations. They're not just from national non-government organisations, but we get people from UN organisations, we get people from government agencies, we get people from for-profit organisations as well. I do apologise, my phone just rang there, and I've lost my screen. So we do get very, very diverse. We do get very, very diverse groups of people coming through. Sorry, just bear with me. And it's the networks that people value more than anything else, I think, when they actually exit the course. And these are groups of people that have bonded in a way that I don't think I've ever seen. I've been working in terms of building capacity of people across humanitarian work for the last 15 or so years, and including in prior to that in community emergency management as well. And one of the things that struck me about what we do with this particular leadership program is the strength of the bonds that are formed between different students. There's something about that shared experience of going through something like the Humanitarian Leadership program that brings people together. Doesn't just bring people together who've been on that particular course together, but it's now generating links between different cohorts. We had a very successful event in October last year where we had 20 or 30 of our alumni come together with representatives from each of the different courses, from the first one done back in 2012 all the way through to the last one that we did last year. And we just had this wonderful event where people were able to bond almost immediately because of that shared experience of going through the Humanitarian Leadership program. I'm conscious that I've done a lot of talking. I think I've been talking for about 20 minutes now. But I'm going to hand over to you and field any questions that you might have. And with assistance from Tara, hopefully I can answer them for you in a comprehensive and meaningful way. I hope that's been useful for you. I do apologise if I have talked too quickly, but I'm more than happy to clarify. The July intake is currently open. There's a couple of weeks left if you want to get an application in. But always, a team here and myself are always happy to talk to you about the course, about where it might take you, and how you might benefit from it. But thank you very much for listening. Okay, thank you. I've got a question from Nicholas, which I'll try and answer as clearly as I can. So in terms of the eligibility criteria, we do take people who don't necessarily have 5 years of development and humanitarian experience, but they might have other experiences before they came in. I certainly wouldn't want to discourage you from applying, because at least then we can review your application, and we might come back with you with a recommendation of maybe you need to apply in another year or another 2. But by all means, think about putting an application in, and that allows us to assess your experience as well. In terms of the structure and content of the remote learning piece, so the way that the course runs over an 8-month period, and it falls in line roughly with the Australian University calendar, and that's really just to make it easier to run the online components more than anything. Is that the first unit is focused on making sure everyone has the same baseline understanding of the humanitarian system and the different components of it and how it all fits together. And then what that does is that then leads you to your first intensive residential, which generally takes place in Melbourne, and it lasts for 7 days in total. So for the July intake, that'll be in November. If you successfully pass both the online unit and the first residential, you're then able to continue on to the second half of the course. The second online unit is much more focused on some of the strategic issues, or many of the strategic issues that we face within humanitarian settings, but it also allows you to start getting more involved in group work as well between you and other students as well. So many of the students that you would have met in the residential, you will then do group work with them as well. And it's also where we start to introduce a simulation within an online context, which then feeds into a fourth unit. And the fourth unit is much more intense than the than the first residential unit, and that runs for about 8 days, and so on. I hope that gives you a bit more understanding of the structure and the content of the remote learning. The remote learning, we do recommend students spend at least 10 hours a week of study time if you want to achieve reasonable grades, whereas the residential components are only a pass or a fail as well. I'm just having a look at the Daniel there has a question. The course is the equivalent to a postgraduate certificate. So it is the equivalent of 1/3 of a master's. So most postgraduate or graduate qualifications are, you have a graduate certificate, you have a graduate diploma, and then you have a master's. So you can use the course in order to then progress all the way through to a master's program if you want. But I'm happy to take more questions on that. And if you've got some more specific questions around, if you like, the academic component, then we can ask someone from the academic team to give you a bit of a description around that as well. Are there any other questions? So so thank you, Nicholas. There is an intake that we're recruiting now for a July commencement, and their first residential would be in November. So you would start your online unit in July. You would come to Melbourne early November, and there is also an intake that commences in November, which has their first residential in March. No worries. Thank you very much, Nicholas. When's the deadline for the July intake? I believe the deadline for the July intake is the end of next week. If you'd like to apply for the July intake and you are struggling to get your application in by the end of next week, then please email us and let us know so that we can help you out with that. There is a bit of paperwork involved in the application process, particularly if you are applying with employer sponsorship as well. The course fees include your accommodation and catering for the residentials, as well as the course fees for the online units. So most students get at least a 50% discount on what the normal fees would be. But I am conscious, as the team is very conscious, that it can sometimes take a little bit of time for people to get their paperwork completed. But so if you're interested in the July intake, but you think you might need a few days to complete the paperwork or need some help getting the paperwork completed, then please do get in touch with us and let us know. We're trying to turn around applications within a week where we can, and letting people know so that they can start the planning for that. And then it's pretty much once we've confirmed somebody's enrolment and they've started the course, we then provide support around things like getting visa letters and so on. Thank you, Aaron. So if there's no other questions, as I said, feel free to get in touch with us if you do have any questions. Feel free to talk to your colleagues about this as well. I believe the team will be making this a link for this session available for people to look at offline. So by all means, feel free to share both this video or presentation, but also do feel free to talk to your friends and colleagues about the course. It really is the best leadership course in the sector for humanitarians, and I'm unashamedly proud of that. So, as I said, please do feel free to talk to others, and both myself and the wider team here are always happy to support.